By October 6, 2023, Gaza is being described as a toxic slum.
But they are, in essence, caged in a toxic slum from birth to death.
Right in the eve of October 7, people of Gaza were left to languish and die.
They see Palestinian resistance within an immoral and uncivilized context.
So they tried diplomacy, they tried international law, and then they tried nonviolent civil resistance. Israel, by its own testimony, lined up along the perimeter fence with Gaza its specially trained snipers. They said there's no distinction between civilians and combatants.
To mark 2 years of genocide, we have a special program with Dr. Norman Finkelstein, looking at the events of October the 7th, the status of the resistance, and how Israel today is a pariah the world over. Is Israel losing the narrative war here in America?
Hamas has 72 hours to accept it, or President Trump gives the green light to annihilate Gaza. Netanyahu counts on the fact that people forget, which is true. Most people do forget. A genocide has no silver linings. Gaza has been, since its founding in 1948, it was being routinely described as a concentration camp. The Nazis in the dock, they covered their eyes like they were ashamed.
Norman Finkelstein, it's really a pleasure to have you on The Thinking Muslim. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Well, look, this show is going out on the second anniversary or commemoration, let's say, of the October the 7th attacks in Israel, the breakout, they call it, from Gaza. I want to start with those attacks on October the 7th. How do you see those events in the context of the history of this conflict, the history of Gaza, and sort of the historical subjugation that Palestinians have been subject to over the last half century or more?
There's one thing to see it in historical context, which I'll present now. But I think there's a separate issue, which is I don't think one should attach any special tactical or strategic significance to the attack. Obviously, they had huge repercussions, which continue as we speak. But I think these were basically acts of desperation. And even though they were carried out or executed with a significant or surprisingly significant degree of sophistication, I do not believe there was any great tactical or strategic vision that impelled these attacks. First, to the historical context. Gaza has been, since its founding really, as an entity, since its founding in 1948. If you look at the historical record, which even came as a surprise to me as I was preparing for publication a new book on Gaza, already from 1948, it was being routinely described by foreign observers. It was being routinely described as a concentration camp. You can take the case of a leading UN official who was in Gaza in the mid-1950s. His name is E.L.M. Burns. And if you open up his book, Between Arab and Jew, I think it was called Between Arab and Jew, but don't quote me on that. I can't say for certain. If you open up his book, he describes Gaza as a concentration camp. When the father of the presidential candidate, Al Gore, Al Gore's father was also a senator. When he visits Gaza in 1967, when E.L.M. Burns made his comment, Gaza was then under the administration of Egypt. In July 1967, Al Gore's father, who was also a senator, he visits Gaza. He comes back. He reports to Congress on what he observed. He described Gaza as a vast concentration camp on the sand. And then if you move on to the present, there are many other individuals, including the former chief of the Israeli National Security Council, Giora Eiland. In 2004, he describes Gaza as a huge concentration camp. So that, so to speak, is the broad context. We're talking about people who are effectively confined and concentrated in a camp. Then, on top of that, there are two other developments. Beginning in 1990, Israel institutes what's called a closure policy, which is gradually, incrementally sealing off Gaza from the West Bank. Then, if we fast forward to 2006, Israel imposes on Gaza a medieval blockade in which it effectively determines who goes in, who goes out, what goes in, what goes out, controls the airspace, controls the territorial waters, and then imposes on Gaza what's called a humanitarian minimum diet. They actually quantify the calories needed by each Gazan to physically survive, because inducing mass starvation is not a good look. At least at that point, they don't have a sufficient pretext. So we now have, on top of the concentration camp, we have this medieval blockade. And by October 6th, 2023, Gaza is being described by The Economist magazine as a rubbish heap. It's being described by the chief UN humanitarian official. It's being described as a toxic slum. That was Gaza on the eve of October 7th. Now there's two other factors. Periodically, Israel launched these high-tech killing sprees in Gaza, the best known of which are Operation Protective Edge in 2008-9 and Operation Cast Lead. No, I reversed it. Operation Cast Lead in 2008-9 and Operation Protective Edge in 2014, in the course of which thousands of civilians are killed, hundreds of children are killed, thousands of homes are destroyed on the most flimsy, and in many cases not even flimsy, fabricated pretexts. And then there's one other consideration, namely, you can say everything Professor Finkelstein just said is true, but it leaves out a critical point, namely, there were options that Hamas had. Why did it have to resort to the tactics of October 7th? But the answer is Hamas exploited all the options.
نتقدم بالشكر الجزيل لمؤسسة بيت المال لجهدهم العظيم في توفير مياه الشرب للأسر النازحة في المخيم، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
time won't allow me now to go through it, but Hamas tried diplomacy. It was peremptorily dismissed by Israel. They tried international law. They cooperated with commissions of inquiry, such as the Goldstone Commission, after Operation Cast Lead in 2008-9. They cooperated, unlike Israel, which never cooperated with the UN commissions. Hamas did. Now, you might say Hamas cooperated because the UN is pro-Hamas, but no. Actually, the UN commissions of inquiry were very tough on Hamas, in my opinion, overly tough on Hamas. Even the UN commission headed by Navi Pillay, it made allegations. When I say Navi Pillay, I'm fast-forwarding to the present. Even the UN commission headed by Navi Pillay, it made allegations against Hamas, claims about Hamas being guilty of sexual violence. The technical term is called conflict-related sexual violence. If you look through the report, I'm willing to hear out any claims, especially if it comes from a reputable human rights body or commission of inquiry, and especially one that's chaired by Navi Pillay. She has a justified high reputation. But if you look at the report, which is dismissed by Israel as pro-Hamas, what's its evidence for Hamas having committed sexual violence? It said that when women were taken hostage, they were forced to sit between two Hamas militants on a motorbike. They call that coerced intimacy. Look, this is just laughable. Coerced intimacy. As if a woman steps on a subway car during rush hour and she's between two African Americans, she's now a victim of coerced intimacy. In any event, to go back to where I left off, they cooperated with, there were several commissions of inquiry after each of Israel's high-tech killing sprees in Gaza. They cooperated. Goldstone wrote a very good report. I should say the Goldstone mission. There were several. There are 4 people on the mission. They wrote a very good report. What came of it? Nothing. And on top of nothing, Goldstone then rescinded his support for the report on April 1st, 2011. So they tried diplomacy, they tried international law, and then they tried nonviolent civil resistance. And what came of their nonviolent civil resistance? Israel, by its own testimony, lined up along the perimeter fence with Gaza its specially trained snipers. That's what Israel says. And then what happened? We know exactly what happened. Another UN Commission of Inquiry into what was called the Great March of Return that began March 30th, 2018. And what happened? Well, according to the Commission of Inquiry, which produced a very substantial report, it ran to 250 pages, single-spaced. According to the UN Commission of Inquiry, they targeted children, the snipers. Israel itself said every bullet hit its target. They targeted children, they targeted medics, they targeted journalists, they targeted disabled people, they targeted double amputees who were nowhere near the fence. They were 300 meters away from the fence, and they weren't involved in any, they weren't even demonstrators. They were just like leaning against trees. So that brings us to what seems to me the obvious question. The obvious question is, what options did they have on October 7th? What were their options? They were by Israel's own reckoning. And bear in mind, when Giora Eiland, the former head of Israel's National Security Council, when he described Gaza as a huge concentration camp, that was before the blockade. That was before the siege. That was 2004. The siege doesn't begin until January 2006. So you have these people locked up in the concentration camp. They have attempted to exploit diplomacy, international law, nonviolent civil resistance. Everything fails. Gaza had disappeared from the political scene. It's forgotten now because obviously Gaza has now dominated the headlines for 2 years. But by 2020, Gaza was gone. Nobody talked about Gaza anymore. I know that. I know that because I had given up on Gaza. I stopped reading about it. I stopped researching it. I certainly stopped writing about it. My last book on Gaza sold 370 copies, half of which were purchased by me. Yes, it's true, because it was a book designed to influence an international criminal court decision having to do with Gaza. So I purchased the copies in order to give them free to the ICC, International Criminal Court, bureaucracy. It was clear to me this is going nowhere. I was squandering time, which at this point in my life, I wanted to do something else. I didn't see any point anymore. And the only talk in the town at that time, we're talking about right in the eve of October 7th, the only talk of the town was if and when Saudi Arabia would join the Abraham Accords. Gaza was gone. And the people of Gaza were left to languish and die. Now, the people who organized the breakout on October 7th, I don't think they had any grand vision. I think that's just silly. No, Mr. Sinwar, he was in an Israeli prison for 20 years. And then he himself said, I went from one prison to another. During the prisoner exchange, he went to Gaza. I had to laugh. You'll excuse the digressions, but in the current Trump plan for Gaza, they say 250 lifetime who are serving life sentences will be released to Gaza. And they're going to release, I think, about 50, they say in the plan, it's never going to happen, but, and they're going to let loose about, I think they said 1,500 people who were rounded up detainees. Yeah. Okay? Oh, great. You get to be part of the genocide. That's I mean, I guess I would prefer to be in an Israeli prison than be released to Gaza. To be exterminated, fine, I'll take the life in prison. In any event, Sinwar, he went, as he said, from one prison to the next. When you're in prison for that long, and then you're in Gaza, your vision is so narrow. We call it in English tunnel vision. Yeah. It was clear he didn't tell Hezbollah or Iran what he planned to do. And you saw at the beginning, Sayyid Nasrallah, the late son, Sayyid Nasrallah, he was not happy with what happened. He said, we were not told. And you could tell he was not happy about that fact because he had strategic vision. He did. He was a very smart guy, a military commander, but he also had a capacious mind. And he was very serious. He did his homework each morning. if you remember his last speech before his assassination, he said, we have to be honest. They have the technological edge, meaning Israel. Israel has the technological edge, which is to say this was not the right time to be doing this. But he was stuck because he's, quote unquote, the leader of the resistance. He has to do something. But if he does too much, Israel will do to Lebanon what it did to Gaza. And so he tried to carve out a middle path between doing nothing and doing too much. There was no middle path. And that was the end of, unfortunately, the end of him and maybe the end of Hezbollah. That time will tell. In any event, for Nasrallah, for Sinwar, I think it was a roll of the dice. It was like, let's see what happens.
So it was desperation.
It was just desperation.
Yeah.
He wanted to convey the message that the status quo can't hold. If you think that you can negotiate your Abraham Accords and whatever else, and that we're just going to stay here to languish and die. It's like an elephant burial ground, Gaza. They were just left to languish and die.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen. So that to me, there's the historical context, there's the political context, namely they tried every option. And then there was the reality that there was no strategic vision, and I don't think we should try to endow it. These are acts of desperation. They were very similar, if you look into history, they're very similar to the slave revolts. When the slave revolts happen, the one I'm most familiar with is the Nat Turner Revolt, which is the biggest slave uprising in U.S. history prior to the Civil War. He gives an order, kill all whites. That was his order, kill all whites. Did he have any big strategic vision? No. He thought that if you start killing the white people, it would shake up the system. People will realize we shouldn't, the slavery is...
abhorrent, yeah.
Well, that it's a political problem. That's what he wanted to do. He wanted to shake up the status quo and force the issue of slavery on the national agenda. Just like Sinwar, if you can credit any vision, it was to force the issue of Gaza on the national agenda.
And has it done
that? It did, but
at a cost.
Yeah, at quite a cost, quite a price.
Yeah.
How it will be reckoned in history, my guess is it will go down in history as similar to other slave revolts, which is to say, it was desperate, it was hopeless, but it was the last. It was the last desperate manifestation of human honor, and that's why it will probably go down in history the same way as the Nat Turner Rebellion, which is you can acknowledge that atrocities of a high magnitude occurred on October 7th. You can acknowledge that, but at the same time, you can refuse to condemn the perpetrators of the massacre on October 7th. Just like you won't find anyone nowadays, you won't find anyone nowadays who will condemn Nat Turner. Some people will say, I don't agree with his methods, fine, but nobody's going to say, because what was he supposed to do? What was he supposed to do? Was he supposed to forfeit his earthly existence? The Nat Turner Rebellion occurs in 1831. The Civil War doesn't come along until 30 years later, which means Nat Turner would have been an old man and he quite probably would have been dead by then. So it means you're asking somebody to forfeit their earthly existence. Would anybody accept that? Forfeiting their earthly existence? Well, if we don't expect that of a slave like Nat Turner, then we have no right to expect that forfeiture from the people of Gaza.
Yeah.
So I think you can acknowledge, as most of the abolitionists, opponents of slavery, they were called white abolitionists, you can acknowledge what happened during the Nat Turner Rebellion, like October 7th, was horrible, ghastly, and so forth. But then you can refuse to condemn Nat Turner and do as the abolitionists did. They condemned the system that forced Nat Turner to resort to this modus operandi, kill all white people. They didn't condemn Turner. They condemned the system of white supremacy that forced him to exercise that option. Now, some people make the argument, but why do you have to kill all these civilians, right? I have to say, on first sight, there seems to be an argument there. You know, why not just target military personnel? But to my thinking, it's politically, it's an irrelevance. Why? Let's take a simple hypothetical.
Yeah.
Let's say instead of on October 7th, 400 combatants and 1,200 civilians were, 400 combatants and 800 civilians were killed. Let's hypothetically say 1,200 combatants were killed. Do you think the reaction of Israelis would be any less indignant? Do you think the international community would be any less supportive of Israel? Any less? A jot less? An iota less supportive? Israel is essentially, it's a lunatic state. I think in the literal sense, it's a lunatic state. It's a delusional state. It's a genocidal state, but it's also a delusional and lunatic state. It's also a Sparta-like state. What does it mean in this context to refer to it as a Sparta-like state? It attaches more value to a combatant death than it does to a civilian death. If they had killed 1,200 IDF soldiers, the reaction would have been more, not less insane. So I find that distinction. Look, there are the laws, so-called laws of war. It's called IHL, International Humanitarian Law. There are the laws of war, which I am obliged to acknowledge their existence and that they have to be respected. I get that. However, there are aspects of the laws of war which I don't really personally accept. I recognize they exist and they have to be obeyed, but I don't accept them. So I don't accept the idea that the militants in Gaza are deserving targets of death because they're quote unquote combatants. I don't really accept that. They're young men. Most of them are ages 18 to 22 because they wouldn't have volunteered for the mission if they had families at home. Because it was a suicide mission. They knew they weren't going to come back, except for the ones who took hostages. But they knew most of them weren't going to come back. And given that Hamas was a large enough organization, those who had family responsibilities probably weren't volunteers in the mission. Maybe those who had loved ones killed and wanted to be on the mission. But in general, it's going to be the younger people who aren't leaving a family behind. Why did they deserve to die? Because they didn't want to forfeit our lives to languish and die in a concentration camp. I don't accept that. I don't think, in my opinion, the Israelis say everybody in Gaza is not innocent, and I'll take the other view. I think everybody in Gaza is innocent. That's my view.
Yeah.
Everybody deserves a life. Everybody deserves a life. It was said of Nat Turner. Nat Turner was a very smart guy. Everybody agreed on that. Yeah. White and black. Nat Turner was a very smart guy. And they said of Nat Turner, there was this huge chasm, abyss, empty space between what he'd aspired to be in this, his only earthly existence, and what he can expect to be, which is just to be born, to live, and to die a slave. Yeah. And that was at the core of what animated Nat Turner to organize the revolt. I think everybody in Gaza has a right to live. I don't accept the distinction between combatants and civilians. I recognize as a legal matter, but as a moral matter, no. I don't accept it. They had no options. They had no options. And if anyone wants to show me an option, yes, it's true, probably.
Yeah.
If Hamas forfeited power, would they have had an option? If Hamas had forfeited power, Gaza would have gone back to what it was before January 2006, which Giora Island said in 2004 was a concentration camp.
Yeah, I mean, because of course, the West, America, UK, Europe, they tend to exceptionalize Hamas violence or resistance violence. So if they see Palestinian resistance within an immoral and uncivilized context. I mean, you know, I'm from the UK, and we hear this all the time from the previous Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, who would talk about the barbarism of October the 7th and the savagery. And we see that throughout. That language is used in America, in Europe. From your perspective, I mean, is there anything exceptional about Palestinian resistance that places them within those categories?
Yes. In terms of numbers, it's relatively trivial. There's no question a killing on a significant magnitude occurred on October 7th. I am not going to in any way pretend otherwise. I don't think there's evidence to support the claims that most of the deaths were caused by Israelis in implementing the Hannibal doctrine. I don't believe there's evidence to support that significantly affected the death toll. But I think what's the number? The number is something like 30 children were killed on October 7th. I think that's the figure, around 30. Now about 30,000 children have been killed by Israel.
Yeah.
So to speak of, and not collateral damage, if you look at the latest Commission of Inquiry report, UN Commission of Inquiry report, also by Navi Pillay. There were many reports. I think there are 5 now. If you look at the latest, Israel is routinely targeting children in the head, in the skull, and in the chest. So there's nothing that distinguishes what Israel has done from what Hamas did, except the numbers. I mean, we're talking about, you know, the expression at some point, magnitude, quantity turns into quality. Well, when you go from 30 to 30,000, we're talking about a different phenomenon. So I don't attach, even at the most crude level, even at the most crude level, you know, at the sophisticated level, you could say, well, there's a difference between using, between targeting civilians and civilians being killed and collateral damage. And I'm not going to go into that right now, but this is targeting children. And it's not new. It was already, I mean, I go back as far as the first Intifada in 1987. During the first Intifada, the policy was the force, might, and beatings. That was the declared policy of the then defense minister, Yitzhak Rabin. And force, might, and beatings meant you went around and you broke the bones of children. It was the children throwing the stones, and it was the policy of force, might, and beatings. So this sadistic behavior against children is not something new. And it's not even controversial. You might recall about a half year ago was the head of the one of the leaders of the opposition in Israel. He said the Israeli soldiers, the IDF, they kill children as a hobby. That was the expression he used. And he doubled down on it, but then there was the uproar and he was forced to retract. But of course, everybody knows they're doing that. Everybody knows they're killing children as a hobby.
Can I ask you about the Abraham Accords? Because you mentioned that October 7th, prior to that, I mean, all the talk was about Saudi Arabia joining the Abraham Accords. I mean, do you think that, in a sense, the Abraham Accords, at least the extension of those accords, is now, if not on pause, over? I mean, have they? No,
not at all. I think it's going to happen.
The Saudis are still
yes.
on course.
I mean, the Saudis have won. The Saudis wanted to have the U.S. and Israel pull their chestnuts out of the fire because they were concerned about the axis of resistance.
Yeah.
Now, two new considerations have come into play. First of all, the axis of resistance has been significantly undermined.
Yeah.
So the fear emanating from Iran and its allies has significantly diminished.
True.
And the other side is Israel has made clear that we're in charge in this region. You have only one role to play as slaves, as our slaves. And that was the message with the attack on Qatar, that nowhere is off limits to us. Anyone gets out of line, we will put you in your place. And so there's got to be a rational concern on the part of the Saudis that maybe we're making Israel too strong. We wanted to use Israel against Iran, but now maybe Israel is getting too strong, and we will simply be in the position of their slaves. So I think there are probably reservations on the part of Iran now about how far to go with this normalization.
Can you comment on Trump's 21-point plan? This announcement that, and supposedly with the backing of Qatar and other Muslim countries. I mean, how, from two perspectives, and how viable do you think this possible agreement is, and secondly, what does it really mean tangibly for Palestinians?
First of all, there was a famous Hungarian Marxist thinker named George Lukács, and Lukács once commented that we have to always see the present as history. We have to see things in their historical context.
Yeah.
With the exception of Presidents Obama and Biden, with those two exceptions, every president has had a peace plan for the Palestinians since Jimmy Carter.
Yeah.
Jimmy Carter's was the framework, comprehensive framework for peace. There were two aspects of the Jimmy Carter years. There was the big proposal, and then there was the Israel-Egypt peace treaty, which was signed in 1979. But there was a separate one, the comprehensive framework in 1977. And then it spawned one of its offshoots was the Israel-Egypt treaty.
Yeah.
I won't go into the details now, unless you're curious. After Jimmy Carter, there was the Reagan peace plan for the Palestinians, allegedly, in 1982. Then, under the George Bush Sr. administration, there were the Madrid talks to resolve the Israel-Palestine conflict. In Clinton, because Bill Clinton, Bill Clinton succeeds George Bush Sr., there is the Oslo Accords of 1993, and then the Oslo Accords climax in 2000 with the negotiations at Camp David. After Clinton comes Bush, President Bush Jr., and then it's so funny because nobody's ever even heard of any of this, but that's been my métier, so I know them all. This was very ballyhooed. There was the President W. Bush, there was his roadmap to peace.
Yeah.
And then the roadmap to peace climaxes in the Annapolis talks, which were chaired by then Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. Then comes the Obama years, and probably Obama's only achievement in office was that he had no peace plan. That's about his only achievement.
Yeah.
Then came Trump, the first Trump. There was a Trump peace plan. I had completely forgotten. Yeah. But I'm not sure if it was in this first. Yeah, I think they mentioned in 2020 there was a Trump. I have no recollection of it. I was just reading some stuff, and this Trump plan. Oh yeah, it's in the new plan. They mentioned the Trump peace plan. Yeah. I don't even remember it. And then Biden didn't have a peace plan. He just had a genocide plan, which was probably the only honest thing by a U.S. president. And now we have another plan. If you compare the various plans, I would say this one has to be the silliest.
Really?
You know, you don't want to just flippantly denigrate it because there's a genocide going on. A quarter of Gaza is living in famine right now, and every day at least 100 or more people are killed. But if you look at it, what is there to say about it? Number one, the plan has only one timetable. Yeah. There's only one. That is, Hamas has 72 hours to accept it. That's the only, there's no timetable in the plan. Hamas has 72 hours to accept it, or President Trump gives the green light to annihilate Gaza. Well, it's a little late in the day for that. They got the green light under Biden. So there is no timetable. Number two, everything that Israel is obliged to do is contingent on Hamas disarming. Yeah. How do you prove Hamas disarmed? How do you prove that? If Israel says Hamas is still armed, or there are 10,000 Hamas militants who are still in hiding, how do you prove that's not true? Right now, Israel is saying that it's flattening Gaza City because that's where Hamas has regrouped. What's the evidence for that? Does anyone even believe it? That the reason they're flattening Gaza City is because Hamas is ensconced there? Does anyone even believe it? So it talks, at one point it says, before the Hamas is released, the two sides will retreat to an agreed upon line. What line? Yeah. And what happens if they don't agree on the line? Who decides where the line is? Then it says, if you look at point 16, it says that there will be no Israeli redeployment anywhere unless it agrees that Hamas has been disarmed. Otherwise, we're not moving. So it's built into the plan that Hamas doesn't have to, Israel doesn't have to redeploy anywhere. Then it says in one of its happier passages, it says the UN will have free reign to bring in humanitarian goods, at least at the level, they say, of the first ceasefire of January 17th, 2025. But then it has a stipulation. The UN agencies can't be partial to either side. Well, there goes UNRWA, because Israel has already declared UNRWA is pro-Hamas. So UNRWA can't participate. The bottom line, as I see it, is there's a cliche, every crisis is an opportunity.
Yeah.
Okay? There's no question October 7th was a crisis for Israel. I don't think we should deny it. But it was also an opportunity. The opportunity was, for once and for all, to solve the Gaza question. And one of the interesting things when I was reading the latest UN Commission of Inquiry report, because it concludes that Israel is engaging in genocide, if you look at the statements that were made on October 7th, if you look at the statements, we're going to reduce Gaza to rubble. That's what they said. We're going to reduce Gaza to rubble. They said there's no distinction between civilians and combatants. They said we're going to deny any food, water, fuel, or electricity from entering Gaza.
Yeah.
Now, way back then, 2 years ago, when I said, if you look at these statements, these are genocidal statements. They're not ambiguous. So the defense was that they said it in the spur of the moment because of the horror of October 7th. We shouldn't take them literally. They were so shocked. They were so traumatized. But rereading those statements, because they're included in that new Commission of Inquiry report, what struck me was that's exactly what happened. Exactly what they said they were going to do on October 7th is exactly what they did. Gaza was reduced to rubble. The civilian population was targeted. Food was not let in. Starvation was being used as a method of war. Famine was artificially induced. Those weren't spur-of-the-moment statements. That was an opportunity. They realized it quickly, and they proceeded to systematically, methodically act on it. They're not letting go of that goal. That's not going to happen. For them, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. If you know the history of the conflict, over and over again, they were looking for a pretext to expel the population. Actually, the main concern was to expel the population from the West Bank. They were looking, and it looked like in 2003, when the war in Iraq began, that it may happen during the war in Iraq. It looked like it was going to happen in 1991, during the first attack on Iraq, there was speculation that they were going to, speculation that they were going to expel the Palestinians.
Yes.
Now they had the opportunity. October 7th was a godsend for Israel. It was a godsend to solve the Gaza question. They cling to it. They're not going to relent. That's why there are passages where it might surprise you. It says we want Palestinians to stay, the Trump plan says.
Yeah.
We want Palestinians to stay. We want to, they've suffered enough. We want to rebuild a new Gaza. That's what they keep calling it, a new Gaza. And Netanyahu could sign on to everything because he's not giving anything. I don't think whether Hamas will accept, not that Hamas has any choice, and not as even Hamas is a factor. I don't believe Hamas is a factor in any of this, to tell you the truth. Yeah, they probably know where the hostages are held. Actually, I think probably Israel knows where the hostages are held.
Really?
I'm not a military person, but they know exactly which hostages they know exactly which hostages, that they know they're missing. But it also, you get the impression, I could be wrong, they know where they are, which makes you wonder why they don't just carry out a commando operation. But I could be mistaken on that point. In any event, maybe there will be a hostage. Maybe Hamas will agree to it out of desperation, really. What are its options? But that's as far as it'll go.
You don't think Netanyahu really cares for... The plan still goes ahead of clearing Gaza.
There's no plans.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, he will continue. Their goal is very simple.
To clear out Gaza.
Yeah, to clear out Gaza. And we have to make a distinction. Their actual objective is ethnic cleansing. But they're using genocidal means to achieve the ethnic cleansing objective. If you look at the definition of genocide, it's the intent to destroy in whole or in part a racial, ethnic, national, religious group. Yes, their intent is to destroy in whole or in part, whatever it takes, by hook or by crook, to destroy in whole or in part the population of Gaza in order to achieve its ethnic cleansing. So even though I personally don't believe that's their goal, not that they care much, if they could nuke Gaza, they would. But it's an international system. You operate within constraints, and nobody yet is giving a green light to nuke Gaza. If they could kill everybody in Gaza, it won't even be with any remorse. Because as I said, Israel is a completely lunatic and delusional state and society. A delusional state and society. If you take the case of the Germans during World War II, there was a recognition, very deep in the psyche, but there was a recognition, very deep, that they're doing a wrong. They're committing a wrong. So in 1943, Himmler, one of the masterminds of the extermination, Heinrich Himmler, he gives a famous speech at Posen, P-O-S-E-N, And in the speech, he says, literally, poor us, meaning Germans, that we were burdened by history to solve the Jewish question, to rid the world of the Jews. Poor us, the history had put on our shoulders the onerous task of killing the Jews. Israel has no recognition of that. There's no feeling of an onerous task. If you look at the Nuremberg proceedings after the war against the main Nazi war criminals, those who survived, Goering committed suicide, Hitler committed suicide, but Himmler committed suicide. But I said Goering, excuse me. Goebbels committed suicide. Hitler committed suicide. Himmler, my memory is he was captured and then he had a capsule and he committed suicide. But there were ranking officers at the Nuremberg trials. There was Goering, the Air Force general and top person, and several others, about 12. I can't remember now. In any event, during the hearings, the proceedings, it was a trial. They were found guilty and hung, with one exception, the banker, Schacht. They had newsreels of the concentration camps, okay? They had newsreels. And the Nazis in the dock, they covered their eyes like they were ashamed. They knew what was going on, of course.
Yeah.
But at least there was a faint recognition that a wrong had been done. That's not the Israelis.
Really?
They kill children for target practice as a hobby. There's no recognition at all. There's no recognition at all. Yeah. So for them, it's an opportunity. They're not going to let go of it. There's nothing in the Trump plan that's going to force them to let go of it. If they get the hostages released, and he doesn't want, Netanyahu doesn't want the hostages released. It's a good PR thing for their apologists abroad to say it's about the hostages. So he prefers the Hamas say no, because if Hamas says no, then Trump has given the green light for annihilation. But maybe Hamas will decide what's the point and let them go, and in which case Israel just fabricate a pretext. But we said that Hamas had to be disarmed, and according to our intelligence, there's still 10,000 militants who have weapons, and we're not going to withdraw until, the usual.
Yeah. We would know. I mean, we would know by the time that the show goes out.
Well, it wasn't clear.
Yeah.
It said 72 hours.
Yeah.
But does the Israeli Knesset formally have to accept the agreement?
Right. Yeah.
I wasn't sure.
And the role of Tony Blair here, Tony Blair's role in this as some sort of viceroy of Gaza.
Tony Blair, he's an imitation of Bill Clinton. There was the Bill Clinton Foundation. And the Bill Clinton Foundation was basically influence peddling. All the corrupt dictators in the world gave money. Well, it's true, it's a fact. Gave money to the Clinton Foundation so as to ensure that Clinton will exercise his formidable power because he's a true political animal. I mean, there are some presidents who don't have a political bone in their body. They were just actors. That was Reagan. That was George Bush Jr., and that was Obama. None of them had any political bone in their body. But Clinton, both husband and wife, they never retreated from political life. They're commenting on everything. They're political animals. Same thing was true of Cheney, the vice president under George Bush Jr. He didn't stop talking. because that's who he was. He was a political animal. So Clinton invented this influence peddling thing called the Clinton Foundation, and now Blair has his own. He just collects checks for peddling influence, yes. And he has no commitment. What he'll do, probably my guess is he'll do nothing. I mean, he'll do harm wherever he can. He'll do harm. We already know Mr. Blair, not just from the war in Iraq. I mean, Blair in any world would be hanging from the Eiffel Tower. He wouldn't be hanging from the highest lamppost in the world. He'd be hanging from the Eiffel Tower. He's a mass murderer. You know, Kofi Annan, who was the Secretary General of the UN during the attack on Iraq, it took him a long time, I think, until it was not until he left office when he finally said it was an illegal war. Well, if it's an illegal war, then Tony Blair stands charged with and guilty of a war of aggression, which is under international law considered the supreme crime, the crime of aggression. So Tony Blair belongs, as I said, strung up from the Eiffel Tower at the peak of the Eiffel Tower. But I don't think, actually, I don't even believe we're going to get that far. Mm. Who's going to be part of this international stabilization force? Who wants that job? Who's going to volunteer? Yeah. There were a few things in the Trump plan which sounded true. Like they said, this one I liked, they're going to have Egypt and Jordan train a local police force in Gaza. You know, just like they trained the Palestinian Authority security forces. Mm. We know exactly what that training is going to be, 10 ways to torture your victims.
Yes.
10 ways to torture your detainees. That sounded like, yeah, they'll probably attempt that. But an international stabilization force, who's going to go in? I don't know. Who's going to volunteer troops? Saudis? No, that doesn't sound very plausible. Mm. Bahrain? I don't think that's going to happen. Emirates? I don't think that's going to happen. Qatar? They're going to send Qataris in this international stabilization force that they're talking about. All of it is just fiction.
And can I ask you finally, is Israel losing the narrative war here in America? I mean, not just on, I mean, there is obviously a groundswell of support now amongst young left-leaning Americans, but also very interestingly amongst the right. You know, you've spoken to Candace Owen, Tucker Carlson. You have got this growing anti-Israel, anti-Zionism maybe within MAGA circles. I mean, can you comment on that shift in public opinion?
There are a couple of things to say. First of all, there are shifts in public opinion, but then the question is, will they have an enduring impact? Netanyahu counts on the fact that people forget, which is true. Most people do forget. And he counts on the fact that, yes, Israel is going to have to weather the storm or weather the repercussions of its genocide in Gaza. It'll last a few years. He recognizes that. But for Netanyahu, he's a true believer. He's a true believer. He believes in Jews are superior, that everybody else is insignificant next to the Jews. He's a real true believer. He's a Nazi Übermensch. He believes in Übermensch was, Supermen, and then there are the Untermensch, the subhumans. And Netanyahu, the Jews are the Übermenschen, and everybody else, not just Arabs.
Yeah,
black people. His father, Ben Zion Netanyahu, was just the most disgusting racist against black people. So he's a true believer, and he wants to be remembered as the liberator of the land of Israel, of Eretz Israel, the liberator. And he counts on the fact that, you take the case of the United States. Every American president was implicated in the extermination and expulsion of the Native American population. Every American president, up until the beginning of the 20th century. Did it affect their reputations? Any of them? Do we remember that George Washington was known among the Iroquois as the town destroyer? They had a nickname for him. That every American president, up to including Lincoln, was involved in the expulsion of the Cherokee Indians in our country? No. The cliche, it's the victors who write the history. And he counts on the fact that killing off the native population will be seen as a footnote. It will be seen as, at most, a footnote. So he counts on people forgetting. I would say, and here it's more an intuition than I can prove, there is on the left a left, and you might call it progressive, part of the population, a genuine identification with the sufferings, the martyrdom of the Palestinians. I think there's very little anti-Semitism within that cohort, even though, as I said, there are some resentments of this Jewish power on the left. I get that. And there is throughout our society, there is a tendency which becomes more and more pronounced with time of conspiracy theories. Now, conspiracy theories have always been rife in our country. The Kennedy assassination, and there was always that it existed, but now it's become more pronounced.
Yeah. The
conspiracy theories. Now, on the right, yes, there has been a certain sector of the Republican Party. First of all, its base. The young people on the right, they haven't been indoctrinated with all the Holocaust mania of the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. So, and they only know one Israel. You see, you are much too young to remember, but there was a totally different Israel when I was growing up. It was the Israel of the kibbutzim, the Israel of the cooperatives, the Israel of being socialist, and all of the leaders of Israel pretended to be so civilized and cosmopolitan. That Israel is gone. I mean, what the young people see are monsters. They see monsters. So there's been a disaffection among the base, to which apparently Charlie Kirk was reacting. He recognized that his wholehearted support for Israel was problematic with his base. But I think there's another element. Look, the right wing has always been always harbored anti-Semitism. And I think some of what's coming out of the right is tinged with anti-Semitism. I don't want to name names because I don't want to get involved in these internet gotcha moments and what's the expression they use?
You don't want to go viral.
I don't want to go viral. And what's the expression they use for these? Clickbait.
Clickbait, yes.
Quotes. But sometimes I'm not a web person, but sometimes I listen. And I hear these conspiracy theories about Israel killed JFK. No. Israel was such a backwater in 1963. It was a very poor country. I know it's hard for you to imagine that. It was a very, very poor country. The idea they would kill JFK is so crazy, but you read it now.
Yes.
You read it now.
Yeah.
So, and that's the, the anti-Semitic Jewish conspiracy theories, which I think a lot of what you see in the right is tinged with that. The problem is that Jews are acting in a way that lends credibility to it. When you hear about these people like Bill Ackman gathering at the Hamptons with web influencers, and they're all being paid to do their job. Yeah. Charlie Kirk had big Jewish backers, you know. It then lends credibility to a sinister international Jewish conspiracy. So I think that tendency has always existed on the right. There's been aspects of it on the left, but I don't believe they have been significant. But on the right, they have been significant. And I think there's, could say there's a problem there. It's not the number one problem, but there is a problem there. And I think if you do believe there's a problem, the best way to respond to that problem is to denounce what Israel is doing.
Yeah.
Openly, if you're Jewish, to denounce what Israel is doing. And I'd say the Jewish, as it were, performance since October 7th, it's been good. It's been good. At the beginning, 2 years ago, the major demonstrations, the one that had the most media, were organized by Jewish organizations, Jewish Voices for Peace. What's the other one called? Not in Our Name?
Maybe, yes.
I can't remember.
Yeah.
They were good. They were good. But yes, there has obviously been a shift in public opinion. If it weren't for October 7th, there's no way Mamdani, I mean, this is New York after all. There's no way the Mamdani would have won a primary with his political views at the time. There's no way. Now, all the burden has been shifted to those who refuse to support Mamdani, like Charles Schumer, Hakeem Jeffries. Why aren't they endorsing Mamdani? So the burden has fallen on them. And when Governor Hochul endorsed Mamdani, she said, she kept saying, we have differences of opinion, but she didn't dare say over Israel. She can't even say, you can't even say it now.
Yes.
That you disagree with Mamdani on Israel. So that was another repercussion of October 7th. But I'm decidedly of the opinion there are no silver linings in a genocide. So I'm not going to do a balance sheet whether more good or bad came of October 7th. A genocide has no silver linings. I will acknowledge other things happened, but they don't mitigate what has been done to the people of Gaza.
Thank you so much, Dr. Norman Finkelstein. Thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Please remember to subscribe to our social media and YouTube channels and head over to our website thinkingmuslim.com to sign up to my weekly newsletter. Jazakallah khair.